Hey TYT, I'm Nomiki Konst here in New York for the Oslo Freedom Forum. We have been covering the events and doing interviews with extraordinary humanitarian activists and leaders from around the globe who have come here to share their stories with the international community during the UN's General Session, which is taking place this week. You have the entire world, members of the UN, here in New York. And it's a little hectic, it's a little crazy, the traffic's not great. I always want to mention that in case anybody wants to come to New York this week, they know. But the Oslo Freedom Forum is, it's almost like a relief walking in and hearing the stories of such incredible courage and leadership. And we are very lucky to have someone who I've read about, and I'm swooning a little bit, meaning I'm fangirling out because I've read about him and his incredible work in Serbia. Srdja Popovic. Srdja?
Hi, Nomi.
Popovic.
You're pronouncing it as a decent Greek.
Decent Greek. Greek accent in Serbian, I guess. So you, I've read about your story and the work that you did in Serbia during the revolution. You were one of the many students, 12 students you said, that essentially led a revolution to overthrow the government in the 90s. And you were known for having extraordinary tactics, creativity, and it really broke the mold. And I think our audience in particular, at this moment in US history, there's a very engaged, young, revolutionary spirit that's taking place. And a lot of folks are out there protesting and marching. And I think they can learn a lot from you. So first thing, welcome.
Welcome and welcome to Oslo Freedom Forum. Super to be here. When opening the session last night, Gary Kasparov, the head of the organization, had a marvelous sentence, which I would like to repeat. Sure. He says, you have the United Nations, where more than 60 dictators will come and brag about what they're doing. And this is the alternative United Nation, and he called this assembly Dissidents United. And I really feel like being a part of Dissidents United. And this is the place where we can meet great people, courageous people, and this is the place where we can learn from people, which is amazing feature of it. Thank you for great introduction. I started as a Hobbit student, being nobody, playing bass guitar in a rock band, so not really an activist background. When I was 19, I was thinking the activism is for old grannies fighting for dogs' rights or things of that kind. But then we got a very crazy guy that majority of your audience wouldn't know about, but Slobodan Milosevic started the 5 wars, named the Butcher of Balkans with a good reason, so our whole worlds have started falling apart. So activism in my generation, in my country, in Serbia, was not a conscious choice. It was no choice. So the only choice was to leave the country or stay there and fight. Being a stubborn Serb, and we are well known of being two stubborn people, we somehow decided to fight back. And being a typical Serb, which means read no books, learning only from your own experience, basically the generation of teenagers, we learn only on our own mistakes. So we started in 1992 anti-war movement, which looked very much like your Occupy Wall Street. We were sitting in a university campuses, all the musicians were there, all the cool people were there. And basically Milosevic was bringing foreign journalists and showing everybody that he has this lovely democratic zoo, you know, behind the fence. Look, these people are singing against me. While, of course, in the rural areas, his supporters were voting him in, and he was sending his tanks to Croatia. We matured a little bit in our strategy in the 90s, so we get to the point where we really understood that we need to involve the political opposition as a political alternative. And we did a 996, 97, 100 days of different tactics. This is where we cut our teeth on our tactics, doing everything starting with protests and marches, understanding that these large tactics of concentration are actually not working. They're easier to counter. It's also the place where the police can come in, and then you have a conflict with the police, and something which brings numbers down.
I want you to say that very clearly, because that's a huge lesson right there. Large tactics, or large demonstrations?
Every single workshop of Canvas starts with a slide showing 5 mass protests. And we say, what do you see? And people say, we see nonviolent movement. Say, no, 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 forget about it. Mass tactics of concentration are one of 200 things you can do in the struggle. when you're looking at how you train people to successfully fight, and when you're looking at the tactics, first of all, you need to understand that tactics are the part of the strategy. So it's not like we are protesting because we feel good protesting, but we are protesting with a cause. Every tactics, that's a part of the workshop, the part of our book, has one of three purposes. Either you try to mobilize your supporters, either you try to bring people from the middle. Very important. It's not only enough being right. You need to appeal to the people to be mainstream. Successful movements move from extreme towards mainstream. Look at the environmentalists in the 60s, crazy hippies tying themselves for the fences of the nuclear power plant, and the way they evolved into something which is embedded in every constitution now. So looking at the third thing is disrupting your opponent. And people are very happy disrupting the opponent, and there is this whole obsession with the idea that, we are sitting how far? Maybe 7, 8 metro station from Zuccotti Park? Mm-hmm. How in the world occupying Zuccotti Park is going to disrupt the bank? Mm-hmm. And I met with these people in 2011 while teaching at NYU, and of course they didn't like what I had to tell them. My first question is, if you're a Harry Potter for a day, what would be different? Because every journey starts with a vision. And you are not going to Mordor for the purpose of going to Mordor. You're going to Mordor to bring this ring and destroy it. So if you would be a Hermione Granger for a day, what would be different? So banks are greedy? No banks. So what's there? You need to give people alternative in order to follow. Second, you need strategy. And third, you need to look at the tactics. So if you're really targeting the banks, and that was the big topic there, and we also have this topic on every single class, with our students in the United States, because we do teach in the United States and people bring US cases there. What about, how many of you get a business reply mail? And it's like 20 out of 20. So what about putting the brick in the business reply mail and mailing it back to the bank? So A, you're disrupting your opponent because they're paying the cost. What about 20,000 people do this? And if you compare, when you look at the tactics, wouldn't you rather spend a little bit of time planning and finding the way to really disrupt your opponent, as opposed to bringing 25,000 people into the park and talking them to death. And then they go home. Tomorrow when they wake up, everything is the same. Successful nonviolent struggles require small victories.
But does that little pushback, well, it may not get the press. I mean, that's actually my criticism right now, is that there's so many different marches that even I, as a reporter, which one's important, which one's not important, which one's going to be covered. But traditionally, it's all those people that get the cameras turned on.
Once again, you want to look at impact, and impact is sometimes the media impact, but having the media impact is one way to measure things. 96, 97, we had a typical situation. Now when we are talking about this scientifically, and you look at our materials, and by the way, we have a little animated videos on this thing on our webpage, teaching people how to do stuff, because we are very focused on training common people. We think in the heart of every change, it's a hobbit, it's a little nobody who starts the change at home in her or his neighborhood. And this is why we love social movements. Unlike the political parties, social movements are far the best place for common people to participate, as opposed to elite-driven change. So when you're looking at like 96, 97, you have 20,000 people every day on the square, every day, 100 day. So you march, you carry transparents, blah, 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 blah. Well, people get tired. That's the first thing. People get cold. Winters in Serbia can be pretty cold. It's not Siberia, as many Americans will mix it for, but still, it can get quite cold. And then we figured out, okay, what about changing the point of view? So we had this amazing state TV news in Serbia, and of course the state TV news are very often the hatred symbol of propaganda. Like wherever you look at the dictatorship, it is the state TV news that really, spilled that poison across the society. So instead of standing in smaller and smaller numbers, shrinking in the streets, we decided from 7:30 to 8 p.m. in the time of state TV news to go on our windows and balconies and hit pots and pans. So what happens is that it disperses the protest, and it gets into every neighborhood. It does another great thing. If you are in a dictatorship, you'll get killed if you protest on the street, and it's very difficult, and by the way, it's completely legal to make noise from your window. It's very difficult to suppress. Third, then you go there and you're looking at your community, and you see the granny from the next floor, hitting the pot. You see the father of 3 with his kids having fun on the window. You see a guy with a great stereo surround system playing Rammstein. and you recognize your neighbors. And this is a very powerful moment in every movement, is understanding that we are the many and they are the few. So these tactics of dispersion gives you capability to do things and, you know, get connected with your neighbor. Another thing, successful movements find a way to lower the participation bar when it comes to tactics. Let's take the occupation, for example. I can agree with 100% of what the Occupy Wall Street stands for. I'm definitely one of the 99% in terms of economic, education, whatever. But I can't sit in a park.
Right.
I have work to do, I have activists to train around the world, I have a wife and 2 small kids. So how do I participate in this? Successful movements find a way for people to participate. Otpor, the Serbian resistance movement, started as a student movement. But soon, you know, the mothers and grandmothers start joining. So what these people are going to do? They're definitely too old to go on the street and, you know, swallow the tear gas. So when somebody gets arrested, there is a list of 70 grandmothers and grandfathers who get the phone call of the police station. They place a call. So you find a place for all of these constituencies so people can participate, people can still get away with it, and people feel like this is their movement. In the history of the social movement, the key of the participation is if the people believe movement belongs to them.
Right.
Not like they're following the charismatic leader, but this is our thing.
Keeping them engaged. I don't want to focus too much on U.S. because I know that you do work around the world, and there are real threats that are much, much, much bigger than what's happening here right now. Although I do think that Trump is a historic, in terms of history, is a very serious threat. The Democratic Party, which is supposed to be the alternative, of course, is going through their own civil war. And one thing that I've noticed, and a lot of folks have noticed, is that even though the primaries ended, it still seems to continue. You still have these 2 factions fighting against each other. And it's almost to the point where I feel like, you know, maybe Secretary Clinton or even Bernie Sanders will say something to egg the other one on to keep their supporters engaged in their ideologies. I mean, I think Bernie has a real, you know, agenda to do so, but I don't know what Secretary Clinton's agenda is, but it seems like they're just doing that to keep the forces alive and inspired and angry. Is that a tactic?
That's a principal mistake. And when you look at like every single struggle is different, but when you look at what connects the dots, they're like holy trinity of success in nonviolent movements. First is principle of unity. You need the unity of purpose, unity of vision, unity within the organization. The second one is planning. The third one is nonviolent discipline, because one single act of violence can destroy the whole thing that you are building around. Back to unity. We learned this the hard way. In 1992, it was only students, and politicians were sitting and talking to Milosevic. 96, 97, the opposition won the local elections. Milosevic stole the elections. We demonstrated for 100 days. Milosevic acknowledged the election results. Took 7 months to the opposition to split. This is where we figure out how to become successful. We need to impose unity on the opposition. So these guys won't solve their problems. These guys won't do the stuff. It should be the movement that creates the numbers and the boost, to the extent where opposition politicians, and we're talking about the 19 opposition parties, rallied around one single platform, which was not even their platform, it was our platform. It was formulated through the movement, through the discussions with people, so we literally blackmailed opposition into running one presidential candidate against Milosevic. Through the several different levels. First of all, being on the front line of Milosevic's opposition. Milosevic was not afraid of his political opposition. Milosevic was afraid of the resistance movement. Resistance movement was the Satan in state TV news. Resistance movement was arrested everywhere. Resistance movement was officially proclaimed a terrorist organization. Like, can you imagine the group of young people, average age was 21, so, you know, the high school kids were arrested for wearing a T-shirt with a clenched fist in their schools. And the policeman who arrests them has a kid in that class. So it's really weird. But when it comes to the understanding, I think this is the way. First of all, you need to have a vision. What is the alternative society? I don't know much about the politics in the United States, but because they, like the Serbian media, consider me an expert because I teach here, so they invite me to TV shows, so I had to follow this real clear politics every day. It was exhausting. What I figured out is that there is lack of values and lack of policies. my modest opinion is that American electoral campaign was looking like a very expensive reality show. And guess who wins a reality show? I mean, this is what happens, yes. And when you come back to the values, I think the main importance, not only for movement in US, but for the movement globally, is to put values and politics back inside the political debate. So this is going to be about rights, this is going to be about democracy, this is going to be about migrants, this is going to be about values, what we stand for. It's not going to be whether you're more beautiful or I am louder or whatever. So it's not about the personality. The moment, like, we learned this the hard way in Serbia because we don't love political leaders ourselves. We don't trust political leaders. So we were there like 10 years ago. And we say, okay, this movement is about three group of things. Freedoms, we didn't have freedom of assembly, free press. So that was one level of the society that we were looking at. Another level of society was peace with neighbors. Serbia was in war with Croatia and Bosnia. It was a great effort to create a counter-narrative, which means that, no, it doesn't mean you're patriotic if you hate Croats. It means that you're patriotic if you acknowledge the fact that they are there geographically. So being a good neighbor to them as opposed to shooting to them is probably a little bit more wiser. So it's called the new patriotism. So I think it's a role of all of this movement to find a positive message. And what is really interesting, and I see this as a phenomenon, I'm a big fan of democracy myself because I was born in a dictatorship and earning the hard way. There's this, we need to put the democracy back in a debate because unlike the places like Zimbabwe, where you of course have Mugabe sitting for 26 years and everybody knows he steals elections, we have a growing cohort of people like Orban in Hungary that have come to power through the democratic elections.
Right.
And first thing they start to do, they start undermining the democratic institutions. It's more difficult in developed democracies where institutions are strong, but look at where Erdogan got in Turkey. This guy was popularly elected and claimed as a champion of secular state 10 years ago. In fact, he was doing things like that. But now we're in a place where he has 40,000 people arrested, including the soccer judges accused for being coup plotting. So we need to find a way to defend the pillars of democracy. And I think the best strategy for the movements operating in places where democracy may be in danger is to focusing on defending these pillars. There is a great quote, and I don't know whose it is, but I'm going to sell it as mine. I've heard it from a professor on Tufts. He says, like, there is this democracy doesn't only mean democratic institutions and stable institutions. It also means active citizens. In my favorite book, Lord of the Rings, there is a moment where a wizard Gandalf stands in front of this big gate and the forces of evil are up to attack it. And somebody says, oh, this is a really solid gate built by iron and woods and whatever. And he says the very, very cool quote. He says, no gate will hold if the people abandon it. No democratic institutions will hold if the people abandon it. Democracy is like love. You need to make it every day.
Well, I think the people are definitely feeling it right now in the Western Hemisphere. There's Donald Trump has awakened a lot of folks. We say they got woke. That's the slang that everybody's saying, right? The resistance is collectively maybe a group of voters who maybe they didn't even vote, are suddenly feeling more engaged in the process, showing up on the streets, along with, you know, long activists, people that were at Occupy or before. But it's a different group of folks. It's very diverse. And because there are these political factions still, even in the resistance or the revolution, whatever you want to call it, you know, there's this sense of we have to hurry because we're already losing our democracy. It's slipping away. I mean, Donald Trump is trying to create his own form of state media. You know, he's amping up the defense budget. He's amping up in terms of a police state where, you know, they're arresting activists in different states. There's different laws for in each state when it comes to act. In New York alone, there's a counter-protest unit that doesn't have to operate under traditional laws because they're exempt under the Patriot Act. They were exempt under the Patriot Act, and they're still exempt because it's a counter-protest unit, even though it's NYPD. Our country, and a lot of this we're not even aware of, isn't being reported. How does the resistance with so many new people catch up and fight back against the United States government, essentially?
I don't think the opponent of these people should be the government. I think the opponent of these people should be anybody who harms the institutions. So it's defending the institutions. This is very different battlefield. When you have a clear, like when you have a government like in Egypt that practically puts 30 million people in a big jail, then you know the government is your opponent. When
we do that too, by the way.
Oh yes.
Not the same way, but we do.
But my point here is like the good news or the successful movements are always looking how to bring new people. And when you really want to look at the diversity. But in order, it was not when all the Afro-Americans joined Martin Luther King movement when it became successful. It was when the white people started joining. It is not only when LGBT people joined Harvey Milk. It was when, you know, normal,
the
straight,
neighbors, the parents.
This is like there's this amazing sentence which I quoted somebody in the book. It's like it's not when you see the bunch of gay people protesting at the gay pride. It's when you see the beer belly fathers joining, saying that they love their kids regardless of their sexual orientation. So this is exactly the group of the people, this silent majority, that you want to reach to. In order to reach them, you need to look at what really matters for them. And for the sake of getting them in, you may want to give up tactics or policies which are highly divisive. So I know that will outrage some of your spectators, but you don't put our differences in the heart of the movement's agenda. You put our commonalities. Coalition of 19 different opposition parties in Serbia were standing from those advocating the gay rights in Serbia, which was super exotic and ultra-liberal in 90s. It's like out in the space. And then the guys who were advocating, you know, bringing the religious education to school. But we say, okay, if we don't win the victory in which we have the free and fair elections, how in the world you're going to compete your ideas? Because if those who steal votes decide about who wins on voting, who the heck cares what you're standing for or what you're standing for? So please leave this for later. Once we have the normal institutions, you'll be offering your idea on the political market. Whoever gets more votes, great. This is democracy. So I think looking at the cases of like, I'm really passionate because I get a lot of data about the US movement. What happens is that when we teach a class at NYU, we teach a class at Harvard, we assign students with case. And for the first time in my own, like I teach here for years now, and anywhere between 80 and 100% of the students are in some kind of activism. So I really get people who get passionate about this. So we have all of these cases in class, North Dakota pipeline people. Right. We have a Women's March people. So everywhere you go, you're looking at the tools you can apply to create a social movement. First, unifying vision. Second, know your battlefield. Know which groups you need to mobilize. That means sometimes working with a very strange group. Polish solidarity movement against communism in 80s was a bunch of urban intelligentsia, blue-collar workers, and Roman Catholic Church. You can't imagine these people sitting in the pub. There is no way. So you need to work with the people that you wouldn't be normally working because this is where the numbers is. Plus, I think what is really important now, I've never seen American society so politically divided.